I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. After more than a century of setbacks, the last few years has seen increasing and more successful labor organizing. Adjunct faculty, Starbucks employees, and this week's story, the fight to raise the minimum wage for tipped workers in D.C. The minimum wage campaign, often called Fight for 15, is well known. But minimum wage laws have tended to exclude tipped wage workers, who are assigned a lower guaranteed wage. The rest is supposed to be made up by tips. It's called tipped credit. Employers make up the difference between tips and the general minimum wage. But tipped credit leads to perverse incentives and possibly wage ceiling for many. In D.C. in 2018, voters approved a referendum raising the minimum wage for tipped workers to level with the general minimum wage. That was called Initiative 77. But the D.C. Council killed it. In 2022, a coalition of groups, including the Restaurant Opportunity Center and the Washington, D.C. Democratic Socialists, pushed through a second referendum, Initiative 82, this time with 73% of the vote. I talked with bartender Max Holla and organizer Diana Ramirez to ask them about how I-82 came about and what lies ahead. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C.'s post-punk rock band Gray Swift. Mike Mangiaracina on guitar and vocals, Fabrizio Cariani on guitar and backing vocals, Evan Hurd on bass, and Chris Blackburn on drums. You can find Gray Swift on their Bandcamp page, link in the show notes. In the news this week, the Maryland U.S. Senate race. It is well known that the two leading contenders in the Democratic primary, Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks and Congress member David Trone, have very different campaign finance approaches. As of June 30th, the last campaign finance reporting date available, Trone, a billionaire businessman, had loaned $10 million to his campaign and has spent almost half of that already. In contrast, Angela Alsobrooks reported raising $1.7 million, of which she spent about $400,000. Also running in this race is Montgomery County Councilmember Will Joando, who as of June 30th had raised $526,000 and had spent over $200,000. The finance picture is expected, but this race is going to be an interesting test of whether money does indeed prevail in politics all the time. Keep in mind that money did not prevail in the race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. We reported last week that campaign and PAC money closed the race for the county executive in Montgomery County, but ultimately, Mark Eldridge, who had a money disadvantage but an incumbency advantage, pulled out a 32-vote victory. The endorsements received by Trone and Alsobrooks campaigns tell a different story. Trone's endorsements have come primarily from outside the state. His campaign recently released a list of 27 Congress members who had endorsed him. Prominently progressive well-knowns Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell of California. Alsobrooks, on the other hand, has been trotting out local and state endorsements, including that of Maryland's other U.S. Senator, Chris Van Hollen, and Maryland's State House Speaker, Adrian Jones. The big prize will be Jamie Raskin, who defeated Trone in an earlier race, and then the newly elected governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. The Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, an organization created in 1940 by the Congress, has declared drought operations due to low water level in the river. Water from the Potomac serves 5 million people in the Washington, D.C. region. Low water flow in the river can mean water shortage and environmental damage around the river. The Potomac does run low in the fall months, which are generally dry. But this year, the river watershed had less than usual rainfall. Earlier this spring, the river flow at Point of Rocks dropped below the threshold of 200 cubic feet per second. But it has not been necessary as yet to release water from the reservoirs. Officially, starting drought operations means monitoring water flow more closely, daily even, and evaluating whether to release water from upstream reservoirs such as Jennings-Randolph and Little Seneca. The Montgomery County Board of Education has said that the employer defense law firm it hired to investigate the Beidelman sexual harassment scandal will be ending its work September 8th, after which the Inspector General of Montgomery County and the state's Inspector General for Education may step in to investigate. Both Inspectors General have declined to commit to investigate while Jackson Lewis is still in the building. And it is up to the IGs themselves to decide whether or not they want to get involved. The public demand has been for immediate Inspector General investigations. County Council President Evan Glass and County Council member Don Ludke, County Executive Mark Eldridge have all called for it. But the Board of Education and MCPS leadership have persisted with the Jackson Lewis investigation, arguably to create the defense to protect the school district from what seems likely to be some responsibility in this situation. The Montgomery County IG has the authority to look into the process and policies of MCPS, but the Maryland IG for Education can look at the specific case of harassment, the neglected complaints, and the circumstances of Joel Biddleman's promotion from middle school principal at Farquhar Middle School to principal at Paint Branch High School. In some better news for MCPS, the Federal District Court in Greenbelt last week declined the request from some religious parents to compel the school district to allow families to opt out their children from reading LGBTQ plus themed books in school. The court's ruling follows past opinions that have generally sided with school districts, believing that while religious families have the option to opt out of public schools altogether, they do not have the right to opt out of specific instruction. The full case will continue, but no sooner had the judgment come out on Thursday afternoon, August 24th, the Becket Fund, the law firm which is arguing the case, had filed an appeal with the Fourth Circuit on Friday, August 25th. The Becket Fund was established in 1994 by a former Reagan administration justice official and has made a name for itself by taking on cases where it argues in line with established precedents and therefore generally has a very good record of wins, and on taking on religious liberty cases on behalf of non-Christian faiths. In this case, however, the Becket argument is outside existing precedents, and so seems to be based on the belief that it may be time for the law itself to move. The conservative majority on the Supreme Court has openly indicated their willingness to reconsider the law on religious rights. As you know, we have been doing student book reviews of contested books on the show for the last several weeks. This week, with the start of the new school year, our young reviewer became too busy to do a review, but she has promised to be back. If you want to continue following this issue, visit the I Hate Politics project called Read Before You Ban. We are on Facebook, and you can find links to past reviews on the contested books on that Facebook page. If you know of other contested books in MCPS or in other school districts or public libraries, and you want them reviewed, or you know of students who might be willing to review books on air, please reach out at producer@ihppod.org. I'll be back with bartender Max Holla and labor organizer with National Women's Law Center, Diana Ramirez, to talk about DC's Initiative 82. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Diana Ramirez, Max Holla, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you for having us.
2022, in the elections then, DC voters overwhelmingly approved Initiative 82, which requires the city government to raise the lower floor of tipped minimum wage for restaurant and other hourly workers to the regular minimum wage. Why is this remarkable?
My hourly income went from $5.35 an hour up to $6 an hour back in May, and then in July it went up to $8. And then next year it's going to go up to $10, and then after that it goes up like $2 up until 2027.
Minimum wage for tip workers used to be $5.35 before this, and it's going to go up to $15.
Yeah, whatever the minimum wage is in 2027. That because it's indexed, so we don't quite know yet what that inflation will be in 2027, but whatever it is, it'll be matched in July 1st of 2027. This is going to make a huge difference. Having a stable wage directly from your employer that you can count on, regardless of the weather, regardless of people's attitudes, regardless of all the other things that influence a tip. That is huge, because this means that tipped workers can plan that will know exactly how much they're going to make in a pay period. This means this counts towards their unemployment insurance. This counts towards their wage history. because currently a lot of tip workers, when they go try to buy a car or try to buy a house, you don't have that wage history. So that makes it really hard to prove how much you make. And even if you show your tax returns, a lot of banks will say that's not enough. So this will be stable wage history and stable income. And in practicality, what that means is people can plan their lives, right? You can plan after school activities for your kids because you know how much money you're going to make. You can plan for that big event coming up because you know how much money is going to be in your bank account, or you're going to make. And it also, for women particularly in the industry, that means having to rely less on a lot of the harassment or having to take that harassment, right? Because right now, when you make $6 an hour and you make up the difference in tips, and you have a table, you're upselling alcohol because that's how you make more tips. At the end of your shift, you have a table full of drunk people who try to ask for your phone number or try to give you a hug or try to somehow, with have inappropriate behavior. You're not going to tell them, okay, get out of my restaurant, because they haven't given you a tip, right? So you're going to pretend you like it. You're going to smile. You're going to laugh. You're going to give a fake phone number. And you have to put up with that harassment in order to make ends meet.
I read that most tip workers make, or used to make before this, on an average $11 an hour. Is that correct? And now is that number going to go up?
I've seen that figure. There's a disproportionate amount of tip workers that are below the poverty line. And then in states where the tip credit has been eliminated, there's way less tip workers below the poverty line.
Max, have you seen your income increase now since April?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. It's like the $2 increase. So it's not like huge, but that even comes back to me in the way my taxes work. My tips all get declared, but then they're getting declared on a very small hourly. So only so many taxes can be taken out per paycheck. And often servers are given, bartenders, servers, bussers, whatever position, they're given checks that just say $0. So the amount of taxes were taken up to zero. And then so you end up owing a lot towards the end of, during tax season, because not everything could be taken out. You're making checks that are zero, or you're taking home cash, and that's kind of a fickle way to keep track of your money.
And during the year, you're not paying into your unemployment insurance. So what did we see in the beginning of the pandemic? A lot of restaurant workers didn't even qualify for unemployment insurance because the government said you're too poor. You didn't pay enough into the program when you were working.
If you have a low wage, as tipped workers have a low wage, then is the unemployment that is paid on that wage at the lower level, or does it include somehow the tips that it seems like it's a lot of cash?
It's based on the wage that the employer is paying, so down to $2.13 in some states.
It's $6, is a $2 increase, so is it a 33% increase now in their wages, or is it different?
What we're seeing is a $2 increase in the tip minimum wage every year until 2027. And what we can compare it to, the aggregate data we have to compare that to, are the 7 states that already have the same minimum wage for tip workers. And that's California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Montana, Minnesota, Alaska, and soon to be DC. So the 7 states that already have this, in those states, we see that not only is poverty cut in half, so tip workers who who are paid at the poverty rate, half of those come out of poverty. Sexual harassment is also cut by almost half in those states.
Is it the case that in these states that have already leveled tipped wage with regular minimum wage, that menu prices have gone up or the receipt values have gone up, the average receipt numbers have gone up?
The average is a 5%. It's a 5% increase. So it's not this doomsday that a lot of restaurant associations and owners will say, I'm going to run out of business. I'm going to, the sky's going to fall and I'm going to go out of business. It's a 5% increase that we've seen in the other states.
Max, do you have words for Jose Andres?
I think he pretends to be this like benevolent human rights chef, but he like owns all these businesses and is just kind of like this rich guy who travels and does things for optics.
Does he not support the increase of tipped wages for...
Depends on the day that you ask him.
This is like the dumbest quote I've ever heard. His verbatim is, "We shouldn't pass Initiative 82 because we need to raise the minimum wage for everyone."
Here's what I know about Chef Jose Andres. He was against Initiative 77 back in 2018. But he has restaurants in the DC area, obviously, but he also has restaurants in states that already have one fair wage, the same minimum wage, like Nevada. He has restaurants in Vegas and I think California too, but he runs restaurants, he operates restaurants, and he is able to pay his workers the same minimum wage there. His restaurants are still in operation, right? He's still making money. So then in 2021, when there was a federal bill, the Raise the Wage Act included one fair wage for tipped workers. He came out and supported it. And he was, there's a recording, he was on a webinar where he said, I was wrong. I support this now because at the beginning of the pandemic, he said COVID changed his mind. He said at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of tip workers. His restaurants in DC were offering free meals to restaurant workers because those were the first impacted, right? Restaurants shut down. And he said in this webinar that he noticed that a lot of the people in the line for the free food were his own workers. So it made him realize we need to take care of our people. We need to pay the regular raise wages and do the right thing. And then in 2022, he was against Initiative 82 in DC.
DC passed a similar initiative in 2018 called 77, right? But that didn't go anywhere.
It passed on the ballot. It passed on the ballot with 54%, almost 55%. And a few months later, the council overturned it. They caved into the pressure of the Restaurant Association and a lot of operators. There were tip professionals who came out against an increase in their own wages, but those were primarily white male bartenders already making a lot of money. And this was really not going to affect them. This was mostly for the folks who were making the $11 an hour, right? The less than minimum wage, who couldn't go to their operator, to their manager and say, hey, I'm not making minimum wage, you owe me money. That's really hard to do. So a lot of the higher earners came out against 77.
Why is it different this time?
Pre-COVID, we had a lot of trust with our bosses in the restaurant industry. I mean, my manager who told me that 77 was bad for me, I believed him in part because he is still my friend today. Like, he's a good friend of mine. COVID really proved to us how untrue that was, how much restaurant owners and managers do not value us. And I think that really started to make people realign. People like myself and a lot of other friends I had that were anti-77 who flipped in 2021.
What specifically about COVID made you flip, Max? And you are, I mean, to make it clear, a white male bartender.
People like who are cocktail bartenders, people who are managers, people who even serve in fine dining restaurants, like Michelin starred restaurants. They're very passionate about the products we're selling, in part because their dreams entail owning their own places. And so they want to climb the restaurant hierarchy and they want to keep their future labor costs down.
Yeah, I remember Anthony Bourdain in one show that he did, and he said, it's immigrant labor that runs restaurants and food service. And, you know, and he was like, if you cannot be empathetic with those folks in the back of the shop, then.
So I'm not going to pretend like my Spanish is perfect, but I speak better Spanish than most gringos in the restaurant industry. And something that really bothers me about a lot of these people who are anti-77 are a lot of the same people who I see like not even trying to connect with back of house or their bussers or their barbacks who like, you know, only moved here from El Salvador like a year ago. And they're just much more interested in the salesman component of this line of work rather than like the community. And so they just don't really even care what their barback might think about something like the tip credit, even though their barback is making less in hourly and less a percentage of the tips than them.
So we did call out Jose Andres by name for not being a good operator. Do you want to mention some folks that have actually increased wages and are doing the right thing?
The High Roads Restaurants is an organization of restaurants that take the high road and they pay higher wages and they're committed to high road policies. They put out a list. If you go to highroadsrestaurants.org, you can see the list by state. But a long time supporters in the DC area have been like Andy Shalal with Busboys and Poets and Emar Hutchins with the Florida Avenue Grill. They're like the two who have always supported One Fair Wage, Initiative 77 and Initiative 82. But there's a growing list on that website that people can check out.
McDonald's does not have any tipped wage in any case, so they're not in this business.
Exactly.
There's a Facebook page that I'm on called District Industry, and it's just like thousands of servers and owners and every position that's in the hospitality industry, from brand ambassadors to reps to everything. And there's a lot of job postings in that. Like anytime a friend of mine asks like who's looking around, like I'll check that page and see who's looking around. And I've noticed in the last year, places that are like opening up will say like, this isn't the full minimum wage, but it's better than the $5.35 or that was at the time when I started seeing these posts. People will be like, oh, like hourly will be $12 an hour plus tips. Hourly will be $10 an hour. Like employers are like realizing that like this needs to happen, or at least some employers are. And those are the places that will likely retain workers because they're providing more stable situations that are attractive to people like us.
Sexual harassment of wait staff or even back of the house folks is supposedly rampant.
You have this power dynamic in the restaurant where, they are tip professionals, take your order, they serve you, right? Quote unquote, they are servers. And so a lot of people just see them as they are here for me, to take orders from me and to serve me, when in reality, they are tipped professionals. But this power imbalance that is created with the sub-minimum wage.
We're having a reckoning with who facilitates these spaces and what these spaces mean to us. And I think that there's a major need for change in that arena in terms of like how these spaces are run and how they're supported. And, like just kind of going back to the harassment thing, like a common thing that women I've worked with that they've experienced is, this is so gross. Like, the stereotype is some like old man or something signing the check, and he'll say like, this is a COVID era story. An old man will be like signing the check and be like, can you pull your mask down so I can determine how much to tip you, like based on how pretty they are or not pretty they are, like it's ridiculous. Like the type of stuff that customers think that they're entitled to, because like Diana said, they think it's like about me, it's about the space. And like the way I interact with my guests is, this is the space I'm facilitating and I'm letting you be in it, you know?
Exactly.
And that's what we're doing, because, you know, if, you know, you do something, you're removed from the space, right? So, or hopefully. And so things like making people less dependent on these tips.
I do see a lot of service charges on my receipts when I go out to eat now. And this belongs not to the workers, but to the owners. Is that correct?
To the operators, right? So this is what happened. So Initiative 77 and Initiative 82, all of these, all the ballot initiatives said, what they did is they require employers to bring up their portion of the wage. So it doesn't touch tipping at all, or service fees. It just says you, employer, need to pay your own workers, right? What an idea. And so what restaurant operators said was, okay, Initiative 82 passed. Here's what we're going to do. So the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington came together and said, now we're all going to institute these service charges. This is all, you know, almost like a playbook. Like, here's how we're going to make up the difference. You put in a service charge, because a service charge goes to the restaurant. A tip goes to the worker. So they said, we're going to institute service charges so that we can keep it and then pay the difference, right? The $2 increase in the wages. But what happens when you go to a restaurant and you see this 20% service charge on your bill, you think it's a tip, right? Because you're like, well, it's a 20%.
Yeah.
So then what happened? So that 20%, so you don't leave anything else. So servers and the tip professionals are still getting their base wage, it's $8 an hour now, but now they're not getting tips. And so the Restaurant Association is saying, well, this is because of Initiative 82. No, it's not. This is your policy. You are instituting this service charge and fooling consumers. You're being tricky about this. The ballot initiative said nothing about service charges. And that is what the RAP Act right now in council is trying to codify, that the service charge can be up to 22%, and that all goes to the restaurant.
If it becomes like France, right? So you have a service charge, essentially the menu price is higher, and you tip, and service workers are getting minimum wage. Isn't that what you want?
Yes, but not as a service charge. So just increase your menu prices. Like, be honest with customers about how much we are paying for that burger, right? Don't tell me your burger is $9 and then add, another $9 of fees to it. To have these junk fees as a surprise a lot of times, because a lot of the restaurants right now in DC are not alerting consumers that they're going to see the service fee at the end of the, when they get their check, when they get their bill. So surprise fees, or they're masking these fees as like, the service charge will go to your server. Yeah, as their base wage, not as a tip. So be honest so we want restaurants to be honest and stop giving these junk service fees. Just increase your prices so we know exactly how much we're gonna need to pay, and then we know that anything on top of that is a gratuity.
If you really want to change the power dynamic, if you really want to make it professional, then the next step has to be that you go to a tip-free system, right? That the price includes a living wage for the workers who serve you.
I mean, but we're just not at that point yet.
Okay.
We can't think about that until the base wage issue that we're discussing is figured out in total.
And I think, Sunil, I think that the hesitation that you're hearing, at least in my response, is that we don't know. Like, we haven't studied that yet. We don't know what it's like. And the practice has been so ingrained in the US culture, the restaurant culture, that it's going to take a lot of effort to maybe change that culture. Maybe restaurant workers agree with eliminating the minimum wage, but not setting like going tip free. Maybe that is too much right now. And so I think what I think is the right answer is leave it up to each restaurant, right? Like, which is the standard now, like have a minimum. And then there are some restaurant groups that have eliminated tipping. If it works for you, great. Then they must be reaching that sweet, hourly wage to be attracting their workers. And what that looks like for every restaurant, I'm not sure. I'll leave that up to the operators and the tip professionals. But that is a more complicated conversation, just because of our tipping culture.
Right. And would that conversation sort of break the coalition that you have built behind removal of tip minimum wage?
I don't think our coalition, I mean, speak for myself again. We're not there yet. I don't know, Max, how you feel. Like, the National Women's Law Center would not be in a position to support no tipping at this point. I think there would need to be more studies on it.
I think especially I will not advocate. I personally, as a bartender, will not advocate for a no tipping policy. I won't even think about it until the tip credit is eliminated nationally.
Yeah, the wage is just so low anyway. Even if when we get to $17 an hour, that's not enough.
When people in this country are making $2.13 an hour, I cannot advocate for them not to receive tips right now. Like, it's too intermingled. What's to be done right now is eliminating the tip credit, and that's what we're focused on.
What do you expect is going to happen to Councilmember McDuffie's RAP Act?
It's hard to say. It's gotten a good amount of flack. I think from a lot of different groups. I think a lot of tip workers don't even know about it, which I think is somewhat intentional. And then obviously the restaurant lobby, who had all these alarm bells around service charges, now loves this policy that will mandate that service charges go to base wages. And they also, they now love the $8, $9 sharp increase in 2025, even though the incremental increase is much nicer and much kinder to them.
Yeah, it's a little strange that the restaurant association, I mean, it makes you wonder why the restaurant association is asking for an over, more than double their wage obligations in a year. Like, that's just.
And I mean, McDuffie's campaign ran on a no on 82 vote. He voted that no on 82. If you look at his campaign donors, it's like largely from the restaurant lobby, different restaurant groups, the National Association of Realtors. Restaurants are very much tied into retaining high property values. And so all of these groups want to sabotage this policy, and they're kind of using this bill to create that chaos that can allow that sabotage.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, creating chaos. And we are asking council, look, just stick to the original plan. Initiative 82 has a gradual increase. Restaurants can plan for it. Workers know how much they increase every year. And do not codify the fact that restaurants can charge up to 22%, because you are you're confusing the customer is what you're doing, and affecting the take-home pay for workers, because when customers start seeing a 22% service charge, that's, they're very unlikely to leave a tip on top of that. And so we're asking council, no junk fees, like, the restaurants, if you're going to have a service fee, like, you need to be very clear and honest about where it's going to. Be clear to the consumer. Is this for your own wage obligations, for the restaurant's own wage obligations, or is this a gratuity on top of their wage? Make that clear. And above all, do not sabotage the will of the voters. This is the second time DC voters have asked, have mandated that tip professionals get the full minimum wage. Second time. Not to mention, first you have to sign the petition, and then you have to go vote for it, and then you have to get a petition. And then if you remember, between 77 and Initiative 82, there was a referendum to overturn the overturn of council. Like, so people signed signatures again, and then signed signatures for 80, signed the petition for 82, and then voted for 82. So there's been at least five steps in these three ballot measures. 77, referendum 8, and 82, where DC voters have said, we want this. We want tip professionals to get fair wages directly from their employer. DC Council would be wise to finally listen to the voters. And these are the same voters who elected them into office, right? Let's be clear about this. 77 was on the same ballot where a lot of the council members got reelected. And for them for some of these council members to say, well, it's very confusing. Voters didn't know what they were voting for. Really? Because they voted for you on the same ballot. Should we question that election too? Those election results? This is the will of the voters. Respect the will of the voters. The same voters voted you into office. And let's give to professionals the professional wages that they deserve for once and for all.
McDuffie is saying to his constituents that he does not care about their vote, and that he would rather prioritize the interests of these groups who fund his campaigns. And just, the kind of like internal process of literally changing a voted on policy is undemocratic.
Max Holla, Diana Ramirez, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Sunil.
Lines are drawn in yellow, black, and white. Turn your head and focus on the side of stories, bodies, faces, space, and air. Lines around each box let in the
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. What lessons should we draw from my conversation with labor activists Max Holla and Diana Ramirez? DC is going to be the first jurisdiction to have leveled minimum wage for all tipped workers. Diana Ramirez told me, but I had to cut in the edit, that New York has regular minimum wage for tipped workers except those who work in restaurants. The experience of states that have regular minimum wage for all workers is not that of a dead hospitality industry. Nevada, for example, is a big hospitality state that has regular minimum wage for tipped and non-tipped workers. Jose Andres, the celebrated chef who started his restaurant business in Washington, D.C., operates restaurants in Nevada, presumably making a profit. So his opposition to leveled minimum wage for tipped workers in DC is curious, to say the least. More broadly, what this implies to me is that the economics of the food service industry may not be quite as hand-to-mouth as it is portrayed to be. I'm not addressing specific cases where cost structures may vary, but the general proposition. No doubt, real estate and rent in the DC area is high, but so it is in commercially desirable locations in California and Nevada. Ticket receipts are not dramatically higher in no tipped credit states. This implies one of two things. Either that restaurant operators have sufficiently large margins to absorb the increase in labor costs, or more likely, that they are already making up the gap between tips and minimum wage, so they are already absorbing the costs. Something that we didn't get to in the interview is the coalition that came together to make Initiative 82 a success. While the Restaurant Opportunity Center, for which Diana Ramirez worked previously, put together the initial campaign to put 82 on the ballot, the bulk of the organizing in 2021 and 2022 happened because of the DC chapter of DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. COVID may have reshaped public opinion between Initiative 77 and Initiative 82, but organizing is always important. Indeed, I got some criticism about last week's episode that pinned the rent stabilization victory in Montgomery County on Mark Elrich. I was told that organizing had mattered more. Yes, indeed. If there is a difference, it is that Initiative 82 was a ballot initiative that received 73% of the vote. And rent stabilization is a law passed by the Montgomery County Council. In the last 50 years of economic history of the United States, labor victories have been relatively rare. When they have occurred, they have changed the very economic structure itself, even if it is within one industry. The leveling of minimum wage, as Max Holla and Diana Ramirez have said, can be transformative in bringing waiters and servers above the poverty line, bringing predictability to their income and better receipts for when workers need unemployment or a mortgage. Lastly, it does take a crisis to bring change. COVID may have been just awful, but similar to it raising real wages for working people, in DC, it has put a large part of the workforce on the path to a more stable life. Happy Labor Day, everyone, and especially DC tipped workers. That's all for this episode. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C.'s post-punk rock band Gray Swift. Mike Mangiaricina on guitar and vocals. Fabrizio Cariani on guitar and backing vocals. Evan Hurd on bass. And Chris Blackburn on drums. You can find Gray Swift on their Bandcamp page, which is linked in the show notes. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.